There's a time for tears and a time for pain. Time to hurt while the grief remains. There's a time when peace seems so far away, yet still God holds us on that day.
Thank you for joining us again. Let's start with a question. It won't apply to all of us, but maybe will apply to many. I wonder if you are in mourning. I wonder if you are in mourning. A death of someone you have loved and lost, maybe recently or maybe many years ago. Perhaps someone you have spent the majority of your life with. How can life continue without them? For some in our family, bereavement is recent. For others, it's many years old, but the loss is still real. It still affects daily life. And of course, we can mourn other things too, not just human relationships. The loss of a job or career. The loss of our health and vitality. The loss of a dream, something we'd hoped for that just didn't work out. Maybe many of us, in some way, are mourning something. How do we mourn? Why do we mourn? Is it important to mourn? The famous Ecclesiastes chapter 3 passage says that there is a time for all things, and it includes these lines of wisdom. There is a time to weep, and a time to laugh, and a time to mourn, and a time to dance. I think the writer of Ecclesiastes, that philosopher, would have said that there surely is something necessary about a season where we respond with weeping or mourning. When we face death and the loss of things that are fallen and not part of God's good world, surely it is a correct response to mourn and to weep. Let's read these familiar words. Ecclesiastes 3, we're going to read 1 through to 8. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. Today's song from the Downcast Souls Expectant Hearts album is called There Is a Time for Tears. It's written by Sam Hargreaves. It was written in response for the need for songs that could be used at a funeral.
There's a time for tears and a time for pain.
In writing this song, he reflected upon grieving and mourning. And Sam writes this: Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Matthew 5:4. I used to think that meant if you lost someone, God would comfort you. But I've come to see mourning not just as something that happens as a default, but something we can actively choose to do or not do. Sam recognised that it's part of being human to face loss and tragedy. Each of us will lose loved ones. And there's something very wrong about death and separation, something that should shake us, should make us sad and angry and frustrated. But there's also a human trait that means that we try and avoid actually grieving. We try and avoid mourning. Sam says, we put on a brave face, we laugh it off. Or in more recent times, we distract ourselves with activities, TV box sets, social media, or we attempt to blur the pain with alcohol or other substances. Maybe for Christians, they can be tempted by the triumphant message of hope that we have. We can try and skip over the honesty of mourning, the messiness of grief, and instead jump straight to joy, or at least try to do that. There can be a sense that as followers of Jesus, we shouldn't be sad, we should be joyful. But actually, it's not good for us to suppress the pain. Shouldn't we see sadness and grief and tears actually as a gift that enable us to process our loss? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Looking at loss full on is never easy. It's messy and it's difficult. But if we embrace mourning, we will discover that God is with us. We will discover the healing and the comfort of God, who himself knows about suffering. We will move with our God at our side through that grief. We talked about the valley yesterday, and it might seem endless, but there will be an end in sight. We can lean into the promises of God as we travel through the valley of grief and mourning. A few weeks ago, we thought about that moment that Jesus approached Mary and Martha at the death of their brother Lazarus and Jesus' good friend Lazarus. Jesus knew that he had power to turn things around. In fact, he even knew that he was about to raise Lazarus back from the dead. Yet Jesus still paused to mourn. Jesus was still moved and grieved, filled with overwhelming sadness that this death had happened. Jesus still submerged himself in the grief and the pain of loss. We reminded ourselves that God understands grief and pain and loss. And in fact, he cries with us. I think we can see from all this that mourning, grief, well, it's important. And with a God who knows us and understands us at our side, mourning can be a journey that brings a healing and the promise of peace. In Romans chapter 12, Paul commands the followers to rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Just as God comes alongside and gives us room to grieve and mourn, just as Jesus stands alongside Mary and Martha and cries with them, so we are to stand alongside our brothers and our sisters and give them room to grieve and mourn. Be with them as they discover peace and wholeness. Some words from the song we're about to hear. There's a time to weep from the ache inside, a time to show what we try to hide. There's a time to doubt and wonder why and hold each other as we cry. God of comfort, God of the cross, joining us here to weep, standing beside us, grieving our loss, and be for us the hope of peace. May God bless us. May God come alongside us as we listen to this song together. Amen.
There's a time for tears and a time for pain. Time to hurt while the grief remains. There's a time when peace seems so far away, yet still God holds us on that day. Oh, he holds us. Oh, he holds us. There's a time to weep from the ache inside. Time There's a time to smile